Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, that wanted to come by our convention, and certainly we're always glad to have our next speaker. Certainly it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you Congressman David Rouzer. Now, almost all of us in the Farm Bureau family not only know David Rouzer, but we've watched him over the years, I've literally watched him not grow up, but grow. He is committed, David Rouzer has committed his life and his career to North Carolina people, and to North Carolina agriculture. David Rouzer is a Johnston County native who comes from a farming family. Soon after earning a degree from North Carolina State, David took a job as an agricultural staffer for former U.S. Senator Jesse Helms. That's when I first met David. Returning to North Carolina several years later, David continues his work in support of agriculture at North Carolina State University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. At the request of former Senator Helms, he returned to Washington for the purpose of enacting the tobacco buyout. Following passage of the buyout, David moved back to his home to start his own business. David Rouzer served in the North Carolina Senate. He was elected to the North Carolina Senate in 2008, representing Johnston and Wayne counties. He also served on the staff working closely with Senator Elizabeth Dole, and during David's 2 terms in the North Carolina General Assembly, he was a champion for agriculture and business. David was elected to represent the 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's been a congressman, ladies and gentlemen, that we are proud of. He's been a leader of North Carolina's farm families and rural communities. Please join me in welcoming Congressman David Rouzer to the podium.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, for that kind introduction. I do feel like Larry watched me grow up, and in fact, many of you, as I look out around the crowd here, I've known many of you for a long, long time, and I'll never forget my first day with Senator Helms, and the first day I met Larry Wooten. At that time, Bob Jenkins was president of North Carolina Farm Bureau, and that seems like it was a million years ago in some ways, Larry Wooten. People say how young I look today. I said, well, you should have seen me 20 years ago. I was in diapers. I want to correct the record just slightly. Larry mentioned I'm a native of Johnston County, and on my mom's side of the family, we have been there since the Civil War. In fact, have a tobacco, sweet potato, soybean operation, even peanuts this year, Larry Wooten, for the first time ever. And that farm's been in the family since the Civil War. But I actually grew up in Durham, North Carolina. Went to Northern Durham High School. And as I walked in this morning, I happened to see Ken and Susan Browning here in the audience. Ken, as you may know, was the high school football coach there at Northern Durham. In fact, his son, Chuck, or their son, Chuck, and I were in the same class. In fact, we had Chuck Browning, Carl Reeves, and Dwayne Washington, Larry Wooten, in that class at Northern Durham, 1990. And of course, those 3 players went on to play football at NC State and did other great things, and look at me. But it was a great opportunity growing up those years to spend all my summers working on the farm there in Johnston County, and then when I came back, after working for Senator Helms, Elizabeth Dole, and then also serving in the Bush administration, I settled down there at McGee's Crossroads. I have to tell you that, and you already know this, but don't believe everything that you read and that you see in the news media, even from your most reliable source. Even those channels that I watch that are 70% right are only 70% right. And I say 70% right because many times, because of time constraints and other reasons, they leave out the other 30%. That other 30% is quite crucial in terms of, as a member of Congress or a United States Senator, making decisions that impact the people, not only this state, but the country. And quite honestly, for all the talk about what Congress has not done this year, I like to put all this in perspective. You know, our founding fathers, I think, understood a lot of things. They understood tyranny in all of its forms, including tyranny of the majority. And you don't hear that talked about much these days. But the rules of the United States Senate are such because our founding fathers were concerned about a ruling majority. They were concerned about tyranny of the majority. That's why in the United States Senate it requires practically 60 votes to do just about anything. So if you're Mitch McConnell and you have 52 Republicans, that means for practically everything that you move forward in the Senate, you've got to go find 8 Democrats to vote with you. I am one of the few House members that has high regard for the rules of the Senate because I remember the time when I was there with Senator Helms. And believe me, had it not been for the rules of the Senate, there would have been a number of things that would have passed on a bipartisan basis that would not have been good for North Carolina. In fact, if you want to go back and think about it and really look at it and analyze it, the tobacco quota buyout would have never been achieved at the time that it was had it not been for the rules of the United States Senate, because the tobacco program would have been terminated in the early 80s, Larry Wooten. And that was at a time when nobody wanted to terminate the tobacco program. Now, about 15 years later, 20 years later, everybody wanted to terminate it. But at that point in time, nobody wanted to terminate it. And so there's a purpose for the rules of the Senate in particular. The House is designed to be a direct reflection of the public at any given point in time. And that's why we're up every 2 years. And the Senate's designed to be more deliberative and not so much subject to the whims of the public. That's why only a third of that body is up every 2 years, and they have a 6-year term. So when things don't happen as fast as you would like for them to happen, understand that our Congress is not an institution that was designed to be an institution of immediate gratification. We live in a society today of immediate gratification, but your United States Congress was never intended to be an institution of immediate gratification, and for good reason. The other thing I want to point out is when all the things that we do, all the years that Congress has convened, there's been a lot of stuff that's had bipartisan support that would have been bad for the country that the Congress stopped. When Congress stops things that are bad for the future of the country, guess what? That's good for the republic. I think our founding fathers understood when they put our system of government in place that what they had was as good as it was ever going to get. And left our own devices, we would mess it up really fast. So they made it hard. So I like to paint that picture to put everything in perspective for you. We, for maybe the third time, I think, since the Civil War, have a Republican in the White House, a Republican majority in the Senate, and a Republican majority in the House, only the third time. I said a majority, not control. In the United States Senate, you don't have control unless you have 60 votes. Republicans have 52 votes. So that means on every spending deal, as we're coming here upon the end of the year, you hear a lot of talk about a potential government shutdown. All your budget agreements require 60 votes in the Senate. So that means Mitch McConnell's got to go find 8 Democrats to vote with the 52 Republicans. So just because Republicans have a majority in the House and the Senate doesn't mean they have total control. Our system of government is designed to force a consensus, and if you can't get a consensus, it's designed to force compromise. And if there is no compromise, it's designed that nothing happen. Well, here's the problem. We live in a very divided society today, more divided than it's ever been before. Your body politic in Washington is nothing more than a reflection of society as a whole. You know, in society, you have really stellar citizens, and then you have some that pull society down. Well, we've got a few bad apples in Congress, but not too many. There are a lot of good, that's the other thing I want to point out to you. There are a lot of really good members in the House and in the Senate. All the attention, though, goes to the 1 or 2 that mess everything up for everybody else. But I can assure you there are a number of members in the United States House and the United States Senate that are top quality, and we're very fortunate to have them in their service. Several things that we've been moving forward on this year that have not gotten a lot of attention. One is all the great judicial appointments being made by this administration, the Supreme Court, and all those judges at the lower level. Let me tell you, you can have the right president, you can have the right Congress, but if you don't have the right judges, If you don't have a Supreme Court in particular that adheres to the United States Constitution, every good thing a president and a Congress does, it gets thrown right out the window. That is an untold story of this year, are all the great judges that are being appointed and confirmed by the United States Senate. That's point number one. Point number two, there's a tremendous amount of effort that we've undergone to remake or reform the regulatory agencies at the federal level. Regulatory reform is a key success, and one of the real reasons I think the last 2 quarters the economy has been growing at a 3% clip and not the 1.5%, 2% clip of the previous 8, 9, 10 years. That regulatory environment is crucial to making this country the #1 place to do business. So those are 2 items right there that you don't hear a whole lot about in the news media, but are real success stories for this Congress and this administration this year. Now, you've heard a little bit of talk about tax reform. Let me tell you, if we get this tax reform bill accomplished by Christmas and sent to the president's desk, that will be a legislative miracle. Back in 1986, when Ronald Reagan signed the last major tax reform legislation into law, guess how many times it took them to do it before they got the final product? 3 times. They failed 3 times before they made it work that final time in 1986 and got it sent to the president to be signed into law. It is unheard of that in a president's first term, in his first year, with a Republican majority in the House and a Republican majority in the Senate, or even if it was flipped the other way around, where Democrats had the majority in each chamber in the White House. It is unheard of that a major tax reform bill like we have before us today was passed and signed into law basically within 10 months, 10, 11 months of a president's inauguration. That's unheard of. But yet, all the talk is Congress has done nothing, hasn't been able to do anything. We've not been able to enact the agenda that the American people have sent us to Washington to do. Well, the fact of the matter is, I think at the end of the day, when folks look back on it, they'll say that this first year, this first Congress of this new administration, which doesn't end, by the way, this first Congress of the new administration doesn't end, by the way, until December a year from now. When folks look back, they'll say that was one of the most productive Congresses in the history of this country. We get tax reform done, even if nothing else happens the rest of next year, it will be considered one of the most productive Congresses ever. So it's amazing how you take the media narrative and contrast it with reality, particularly put in perspective of the historical reality and context. It's such a different viewpoint. There's a lot of good things going on. We got the tax reform bill, which I know Senator Tillis and Ted Budd talked a little bit about. I want to talk about the Farm Bill coming up because I serve on the House Agriculture Committee, also serve on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've had 111 hearings, Larry Wooten, dealing with the Farm Bill. This is going to be a major focus the next 2 or 3 months. In fact, I think you'll see a Farm Bill on the floor of the House in the first quarter of next year. Coinciding with that, I think you're going to see a real effort to reform the food stamp program, which is under the jurisdiction of the House Agriculture Committee. And you're going to see a major effort on welfare reform in general. In fact, after this tax reform debate, assuming we get this bill passed and signed into law, you're going to see a major emphasis next year on welfare reform and and coinciding with that, you're going to see a lot of activity on the Farm Bill as well. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, we're going to have jurisdiction over the infrastructure package that's coming out of that the administration is going to propose, which I suspect we may get a proposal from them right before Christmas. If not, it'd be right after the new year. One of the main focuses on that, and one of the things I've been working with the White House on, is getting broadband deployment in our rural areas. Not only broadband deployment, but also water and sewer. My district, the 7th Congressional District, which stretches from southeastern, or has all of southeastern North Carolina, but stretches from the southern part of Johnston County and have all of Wayne County straight down to Wilmington, You've got a lot of communities all through that area, and it's not just relegated to southeastern North Carolina, but all across rural North Carolina as a whole that do not have access to high-speed internet. This is going to be a real focus of ours as we move forward on the House infrastructure bill. And I know the Senate, my colleagues in the Senate are going to be eager to work on that as well. So looking back, if we get through the next 2 years, as I think it's going to play out, you'll have a tax reform bill that's been signed into law. You'll have an infrastructure bill that would be a major investment in rural areas as well as other areas all across the country. And infrastructure is so key. In fact, I tell everybody all the time, if you don't have your agriculture policy right, if you don't have your energy policy right, and if you don't have your infrastructure policies right, you're in big trouble. If you do have them right, if you can feed yourself and feed the rest of the world, if you can provide the energy for your own country and the rest of the world, and you have the infrastructure in place to get products from A to B, you are in a very, very dominant position to be exceptionally prosperous here at home, which enables us to be exceptionally strong abroad. All this goes together, because if you don't have a good, strong, roaring economy, and that's part of what regulatory reform is about, that's part of what tax reform is about, that's part of what our ag policy, our energy policy, our infrastructure policy, that's what it's all about. If you don't have a strong, roaring economy, guess what? You can't rebuild the military. And our military faces the most significant challenges that we have faced since World War II. And those challenges grow even graver by the day. We, quite frankly, are behind the 8 ball in terms of our military readiness, but we are working hard day by day to improve that substantially. But you've got to have a strong, roaring economy in order to have the resources necessary to rebuild it. And that, of course, plays into the debt. You have a $20 trillion debt. How do you solve it? You got to grow the economy, grow more revenues to the Treasury, and you've got to make modifications to the entitlement programs long term, and then you can get it back under control. I've talked way too long, but those are the highlights. Those are the things that I'm working on in the House. The Farm Bill is going to be front and center right after we clear the new year. Look forward to working very closely with Steve Troxler, who I see is here, and the North Carolina Farm Bureau, and our good friends at NC State and North Carolina A&T. It's such a great, incredible partnership that our land grants and the Department of Agriculture and the Farm Bureau have. In fact, it's quite unique, the strength of that partnership that we have here in North Carolina, and it's really been a great service to the people in North Carolina and certainly to you all individually as well. Anything that I can do to be helpful, let us know. Billy Barker, Billy, where are you? Raise your hand. Everybody knows Billy. In fact, Billy is probably better known than I am. Billy, we're very grateful to have him on our team, and anything that you need, feel free to reach out to me or him or anybody else in the office, and just know that nothing is ever good as you think it is, and nothing is ever as bad as you think it is. And so whatever you see in the news media, whether it's from Fox News or MSNBC, always know there's another side to that coin. And Tom Tillis, I see, is here. You know, we all deal with very complex problems and issues that face society today. And we have access to a lot of facts, a lot of input that isn't always reported. And we have an obligation to make the best decision possible for the state of North Carolina and for this country and for the people of this country, which is so incredible to freedom and liberty and security for the rest of the world, that we take that seriously. And we cast our votes based on the best information we have at the time that we have it. And sometimes that's not always reported to the degree that you have the best information that available to you, and you wonder why we make some of the decisions we do. Just know there's probably 20% of that information that we have seen that perhaps the news media has not shared, and that can change a lot of minds pretty quick if you have access to that. So anyhow, thank you so much. Always great to be with you. Anything we can do to be helpful, just let us know. May God always bless you. May God always bless America, and Merry Christmas.